see it. This is what?
This week's. Today we're starting the new Zman. There's an Indian in this week's parsha that maybe we could tie in to the Indian of a new Zman in the Yeshiva and Bechlal, what the purpose is in being in the Yeshiva and Avodas Hashem and so on. But there's the mice in this week's parsha was there was Shmini means with Shmini L'Maluim. It was the 8th day that they were sort of practicing, getting ready for the Hakamas HaMishkan, for the inauguration of the Mishkan and the Avodah. And that very same day, another Avihu were Nifta. On the first day, they were Oinanim. And the different dinam of the Karbonis, how did the fact that they were in this state, how did it affect the Karbonis? So Hashem told them that nevertheless they should do the regular avoided everything they have to do. But there was one carbon, the seer of Rosh Chodesh. It was on Rosh Chodesh, so every month is a carbon of Rosh Chodesh. And that carbon, that goat that was the seer of the Chatas of the Rosh Chodesh, they burnt. They didn't eat it. So Moshe Rabbeinu says here by Chamishi ve'sir Chatas, in regard to the sorrow of the Chatas of Rosh Chodesh, Dorish Moshe v'nei Soiref. It was he investigated and they burnt it. Vayiktzoi, if he got angry, Elazar Alisama, Ben Aaron and Sorim Lamar, he got angry at them. And he said, really, he was angry at Aaron also, but he didn't want to speak angrily to Aaron. He spoke to his two sons, the remaining sons. And he asked them, why didn't you eat the chatas? And he says, this carbon is given to you to carry the Aveira of the whole Klal Yisrael. So he was angry why they didn't eat this carbon. So then the Torah says that Aaron answered that this is a regular carbon every month. It's not a special carbon for the inauguration of the Mishkan. So this carbon we have to treat with a regular dinam. And since they were oining him, they were not allowed to eat this carbon. And Moshe Rabbeinu was masking. Moshe Marita Beinov, Rasha's Hoidav Leiboish. He was made and he wasn't embarrassed to say Lei Shamati. They didn't know this. We learned from this from Midas of Moshe Rabbeinu. But in any case, but the point I want to stelzach on, what does it mean? He said, why didn't you eat this? And I gave you this carbon, Hashem says, to carry the, Moshe Rabbeinu told him over, to carry the sin of the Eidah. So Rashi says a famous halacha, Shetaris Kahanim, it says, Shekahanim oichlim ubaylim miskaprim. When the Kahanim eat this carbon, the Kahanim eating the carbon brings a kapara to the people that brought the carbon. The Kahanim sit and they eat this meat, and eating not the sacrificing of the carbon, the Kahanim eating the meat of the carbon brings a kapara for the people that brought this carbon. So we know such a thing, but when you think about it, it's what does this mean? That way the Kahanim sit and they eat the meat, and they're eating, that brings a kapara. How does a person eating meat, how does that bring a kapara for you that did a averis, big averis? So there's one of the things I saw in this is right at the beginning of Chumash Vayikra, when he starts to speak about Karbonis, the Sipurnu speaks about this, about a lot of things about Karbonis, but in that he speaks about this right in the second pasuk, the Sipurnu, in the beginning of Bamidbar speaks about this. Just had it a moment ago. A second, please. Yeah, in Vekra. Yeah, I have it. In Vekra, beginning of Vekra. I just remember I had it. I lost. Here it is. Yeah. So he says in the middle of the piece in Pasuk Beis, he says there's different types of Averis. V'yois mine hachet. The different Averis. Ksosam b'machshavas halev. Sometimes just the machshav is an Avera. Uksosam gam b'maisa. Sometimes we do a maisa, it's not right. So he says, "V'hina lechaparas hir halev." When you did an avera because of what he was thinking. I mean, by the way, sometimes you can't control what we're thinking. You have to know when this is negaya. Let's say I once saw and someone showed me a very important thing in the Tanya. It's exactly to know. It says that sometimes a person could be davening Shemini Esrei, and he's trying to have a lot of kavanah, and all of a sudden he gets this crazy machshav and a terrible machshav in his tumadik machshav in his mind. So he says, should a person get down about that? That I'm trying to daven and I'm getting these machshavas in my head. So he says no. He says he gives a mashal. Let's say somebody would be davening, and a terrible person would pass by, and he sees this person davening, and he wants to disrupt him from davening. So he starts saying he starts saying terrible things. It's nothing to get depressed about. It's a problem. This guy is bothering you, but somebody else came and he's trying to disturb you. He says the Yetzer Hara in a person is like that person, that level outside. That's the Yetzer Hara. You could be trying to be kavanah. You're trying to have a clear head, and he throws things at you. It's nothing to get depressed about. That's his job. That's what Hashem gave this level, and that's what he says about it. But it looks like sometimes we do have to have a kapara for machshava. I don't know exactly when. Excuse me. Oh, avodah zarah. Okay. So if some person has a machshava to avodah zarah, so he says he needs a kapara for this. So he says the kapara for hira leiv is the part that gets burnt on the mizbeach. He says yolus is proper oiseh chelik ashiyale balahav hamizbeach. Veheim ha'oila, carbon oila, which gets completely burnt. That's a kapara for bad machshava, he says. For emure ha-carbonis, or even a carbon that's eaten, certain parts of that carbon are always burnt, the emurim, the fats, vaskaras ha-mincha, or the kaimitz of the mincha. So that's for machshava, he says. The part that gets burnt, it gets consumed, it goes up. Somehow that's a kapara for machshava. Well, kaparas hamaisa, what part of a carbon is a kapara for an action that a person did, physical action? He says, Ye'usay is proper chelkei carbon and nitin lekahanim. The part that's given to the kahanim means to be eaten. That part is a kapara for actions that Yidden did wrong. Well, how's that? He says, Shetmuras evari hachoite, a person that did an action, that means he sinned with his limbs. He did something with his body, with his evarim. So tmuras evari hachoite, in exchange for the limbs of this sinner, Shes Asku Bepula Sarad, his Evarim, his limbs did an action, a terrible action. Yinosun Chelik Evari HaCarbon, so the limbs of this carbon were given L'Oivde HaKel, to the Kahanim who's serving Hashem, Hamis Askim Ba'avodasai, who are doing the Avodah of Hashem, they're serving Hashem with their limbs. So these limbs of the meat of this carbon represents the meat or the limbs of the person. And those limbs are now eaten by kahanim that are serving Hashem, and Ka'amroi, and he quotes mamish this pasuk in our parsha, like Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Bnei Aaron, "Va'ois nosun lechem lo seisus avoyna eda lechaper leim." V'chein Amru, he says, Teres Kahanim, Rashi brings, but he brings it to Gemara Pesachim. Shed Nuntes, he says, Shekahanim oichlim ubalim miskaprim. Then he goes into different levels of Averis or something, but that's the basic idea. He says that when the Kahanim eat, so they're eating the meat of the carbon is like sort of the person's body, in a sense, is represented now by this meat, and it's being eaten by the Kahanim. I don't know, maybe the way I understand it is that now it's giving koyach to the Kahanim, or serving Hashem, like somehow it's become a part of the Kohen who's serving Hashem. But that's how the Sapun is masber this Inyan. Kahanim oichlin u'bailim mischapim. The eating that represents the evarim of the person, and it's being eaten by the people that are serving Hashem. I saw another shot in this in Mesil Shisharim. He speaks about this almost at the end of the Sefer. Mesil Shisharim, we know, is madregas. He goes based on the Chazal that the Ziris brings the Zrizis brings the whatever Ziris brings the Zrizis and brings the Kiyas and all different madregas. And then maybe even the last, it's the last madrega I think here is Midas HaKedusha. It brings the Kedusha. So we can imagine it's a very high level. That after all different levels, the person gets to the madrega. And he says, but this madrega, he starts sort of saying, a person starts working on this, but to get there, Hashem gives him a gift. If a person does his part, so then Hashem grants him a gift of Kedusha, he says. But he says like this. in this parak, he says, "V'hina ish hamiskadish b'kedushas b'yroi," a person who got to this level, and he became kaddish. Afilu ma'asav hagashmiyim chayzum liyas inyane kedusha mamish. He says that person, his physical actions are kedusha. He says, "V'simonach," and a simon to this, achilas kachim. He says, "She atzma mitzvahs asay, v'amru kahanim oichlim ba'alim miskaprim." He says that he's saying the kahanim have a kedusha. I don't know, maybe this is being kahanim, they reach this madrega of kedusha, but kahanim have a certain kedusha, and he says so their inyanim gashmiyim become inyanim kedusha. In other words, that when a kohen eats, it's not just like a physical person eating, a regular eating. It's like bringing on the mizbeach. It's like it's being served to the mizbeach. And he says this. He goes on to explain this like this. He says that his ma'asim gashmiyim are really like kedusha dika zachin. He says I'm skipping around a little bit, but he says kain hamaychul v'amishta. Now he's not talking about karbonis. When I'm going to quote now, but he says when a kaddish eats, kain hamaychul v'amishta shel ish hakaddish oichel ilahu l'maychul hahu l'mishta hu. He's elevating the food that he eats and the drinks. Kilu nikrav agabi mizbeach mamish. Very strong lashonos. He says that a person can reach this level of kedusha that what goes into him when he's eating, let's say a big tzaddik, and he's eating, you think he's eating, it's like he's a mizbeach, and it's like a carbon being brought on mizbeach. That's what the Shmuezzen explains. A person could reach such levels. So he says the kolamevim doirin tamachachim kila hikrid dikurin, yimali goenim shel tamacham yayin, brings different memech hazal. He says ki talmid chachamim kakdoishim b'darkeim v'chol maseim hine mamish kemigdash u'kamizbeach. And he said mnei shashchina shor aleim k'moshayis shor b'migdash mamish. He compares it to basically mile groinim. He says hine hanikrav lahem ki nikrav al gabi mizbeach u'mile groinim tachs mile has fallen. It's like that's what he brings such high levels. And he says that's what Yaakov Avinu, when he lay down to rest, all the stones wanted to be under his head because the Mishamish, the tzaddik, it's an ilay for the Zach. So this is what does this have shaykhs to us? What are we talking about? But you see, there's an inyan of going up. The person is supposed to go up, like Mishal Hashem, the whole save is to, and that's really an inyan of a yeshiva. We come to a yeshiva, we're supposed to grow in a yeshiva. That's what this is like this like the place where a person can grow. Like I'm as I'm saying it, I remind me of something I said over, I think, from Rebelsky once. I heard this. What? Which one? Yeah, you see, that's right there. That okay, but the Rebelsky said that when they wanted to prove that Aaron Koyach is wrong, and that Aaron is supposed to be the Kohen Gadol, and so he said take every Nasi should give his staff to, and they'll put it in the Kodesh Kedoshim, and whichever ones will grow, that's a right that he's the one Hashem chose. So they all put their sticks into the Kodesh Kedoshim, and Aaron's stick blossomed, and had almonds, whatever it was. So Rebelsky asked, this kind of a kasha, he says, that's not the biggest miracle in the world that a stick should blossom. Why did Hashem pick this particular test? So he said, because we know things to grow, they grow in different soil. Different things grow in different places. Actually, in Cheskel Bottom, just in the first Mishnah, we had something about different seasons for different things as it comes up for different things that grow. So he said, who grows in the Kodesh Kedoshim? If someone blossoms in the Kodesh Kedoshim, that's his soil. So Aaron's stick blossomed, that's right, this is his turf, this is his soil. So saying a yeshiva is a soil for growth. If a person wants to grow, he attaches himself to a yeshiva, to a makom Torah, that's where a person can grow. That's where the nutrients are there, the things are there to help a person grow. And that's the tachlis of a person. The person is supposed to grow. And this we have here, this is an extreme example where a person could be eating, and it's like he's a mezbeach. He can grow to such a level of kedusha. That's what Hashem tells us. There's such a thing, such a dikim that can grow such a level. But every person, his madrega, can grow. That's in Yeshiva. That's what we have to grow. So also, I wanted to mention, is also pretty well known in the Chazon Ish. He has a letter in English Chazon Ish. So in Yud Aleph, he says like this. He's writing a letter to somebody. So he brings here that the Habakkuk said that there's one main message that Hashem's giving us. V'tzadik ben Manasseh Yichya, the Ikar is Amunah. And then he says that Hashem speaks about how much a person contradicts himself in the way he does different things. And there's things that we say we believe, at the same time we maybe don't have enough Amunah, and so on. And he brings a Chazal. It says a very sharp thing. It says it talks about who's an apikairis, because it says in the Mishnah in Chelik, apikairis doesn't have a chelik olam haba. So who's apikairis? So one opinion in Chazal says she'efshar lasik b'Torah ve'ena oisik. A person has an opportunity to learn Torah, and he doesn't. But it's not important. He lets it go by. So he says that's an apikairis. He says l'chayra, someone doesn't learn Torah. He did an avera like any avera. He didn't. He was supposed to do. He give tzedakah and give tzedakah, whatever it was. So he didn't learn. So he says, but how does this make apikaris? Apikaris means that it's an avera, and he calls it chayvus halvavos in his amuna. Apikaris we know has something to do with amuna. Someone is he's not a believer. Someone that could learn and doesn't learn. He did an avera, okay, but he's an apikaris. It's something wrong with his amuna. So he says, but he says like this. L'or hashkafa kalelis, if you have like a broader hashkafa, there is an avoin of minus here, of something disbelief. Why? Because he says like this. He says, a person has a time in this world. A person's panasa, Hashem decrees what a person's panasa is supposed to be. Yom Yom, I was reading the Lashon of the Chazon Ish. Yom Yom yipaches kitzvai. Every day, his time is getting shorter in this world. He says we're going through a corridor in this world. So he says like this: every little bit that we grow in Torah, bidvekas, in getting attached, bakaris hayotze baruch hu, and recognizing Hashem, marles baleha. The Torah lifts a person up, b'pchinas nefesh bahamis, from being similar to an animal. The nefesh maskelis, to being having a seichel, a holy seichel. Mechamor leben adam, from being a donkey to being a person. Being ben adam, from a person to being a malach. So he says, Ein dov mikra b'chol me'ureis shel adam. Nothing is coincidence to happen to a person, and whatever happens, Hashem decrees. Im yalad im nar zokim deseva, a young person, middle age, old person, everything is decreed by Hashem. But then he says like this. This I have underlined from one side. This next line, he says like this: this world, he says, is a riddle. What does it mean? This world is a riddle. He says, "Achida stuma." What does it mean? This world, a person in this world is supposed to be thinking, "What is going on here? What are we? Who are we? What are we? What's it for? How did it happen?" We're supposed to. There's a riddle here. There's something, and most people in this world don't spend time thinking about this. Not trying to figure out, walking the street busy, day to day, and until it's over. But a person that has brains, Shul Seichel, she'd stop to think, sometime, what is the world about? So he says, it's a riddle. So what's the answer to the riddle? What is this world all about? Here you're going to have a strong statement here. The hidden riddle of this whole universe, guf and nefesh, the body and the neshama, pisreina. Now you can tell what's the pisreina, what's the answer to the riddle? His alus b'Torah shebal peh, growing in Torah shebal peh. That's what Chazon Ish says. A person, the riddle, if you want to get the best answer to the riddle, the Chazon Ish says, means to learn Torah and to grow in Torah. He says, Never, he says, the hidden secret of the riddle of this whole world. Guf nefesh pisreina. The answer is his alloys growing, but Shabbat peh. All that really counts at the end of the day, like the most important spot in the world, is the yeshiva, the Dal Mishal Halacha, where a person can learn Torah. That's what the Shechina is. That's the answer to the riddle. If you want to know where's Hashem really at, where's Hashem focused on, where does Hashem want us to be, to want us to grow, in Dal Mishal Halacha. He says, V'amru al chapasik kitayvim dedecha miyayin. It says, we learned it in, I think it's Yeshivas, Chaviv malai divrei seifrim yeshim de'ein shel Torah. That even the Gemara is more chashiv than the Chumash. He says, Chaviv malai divrei seifrim. What the seifrim were machadish, the Chacham learned Torah Shabbat Peh, Hashem is more chaviv to me than the yayin of Torah. So what means what we learn to think and to figure out a kasha and a teretz. What does it mean? What does Hashem want? What did the Chacham say? This is the answer to the riddle of the whole universe. I'm reading to Chazon Ish. So he says, so therefore, if a person lets into his mind that he's going to live a life, he will decide to live like people in the corners, because Ruach has peace and he has dreams. He says that's minus. That's Nesinas Rishus Minus B'Chadya Machshava. He's missing the whole boat of what this world is about. So that's apikorsis, he says. If a person doesn't understand why he's here, then there's some apikorsis there, he says. The Helam Mikol Mitzvahs Hashem. Umachnes as Atzma, he puts himself b'shidrois hazoilim. He puts himself amongst those who say ochel v'shasa. Let's just eat and drink and be happy, and tomorrow we're gone. And he says, "Ve'ein beinoil ben rishaim gemurim v'lei klum." So he says, "Misha efshol elasik b'Torah sha'achas." Someone has the opportunity to learn 1 hour of Torah. Ve'ein oisik. So he says, maybe the kufa veira b'maisakal. He says, but in Elohim excited neshama apikursis. He says, anyway, because he wants to be like just a pasha to life. Kol ma'ile mi'malas haTorah yikarihim mipnimin. Every little bit that we grow in Torah is more precious than diamonds. But he says, a person could lose what he gained. He has to be very careful. A person could go down also. And this is a letter he wrote to somebody, because he says, he wrote to someone, it hurts me to see that you're going down. Someone, I don't know who this person was, and he writing to tell us obviously what the person did. But the person wrote him a letter, and he says, I see from your letter that instead of growing and getting into message what this whole life is about, you're going down, he says. It hurts me very much, he says. And there's Ayvaita. And then just one last thing from him that he says is that in another letter, it's also very famous, in Chazon Ish, did 2 letters later, Yud Gimel, he says like this. Here he's talking about someone who is learning, but doesn't appreciate that he's learning somehow. So he says, I'm going to come to argue with you now. He says, I see from what you wrote to me, or whatever, you don't appreciate yourself properly. And he says, and without thinking, you're putting down your mizalzel in your idea of Torah. And he says like this. When he says, a person who's zocheh to learn Torah, to understand Torah, he walks amongst people. You see him walking down the block. And you look at him, he's a real human being. Another guy down the spot. He says, Chazon Ish says, a person learns Torah, he's a malach. He's amongst people, but he's a malach. He's living a different life than what's around him. And he says, but he says that, so he says you're learning in Zavaita, and you have to apply yourself more, and you'll see, so he gives them a different chizuk. But at the same time, I just want to mention the opposite side of the coin, and also in this week's parasha, at the end of the parasha, it talks about things that we're not allowed to eat. My tarfus, good. You mean them that are not kosher. So the pasuk says, remember at the end of the parsha. Come out the end of the parsha. It says, Al teshatzu es nafshei sechem. Don't ruin your nefesh. B'chol hasheretz hasheretz. And all these creatures that crawl at you, they're not allowed to eat. V'leisetamu b'hem. Don't become tummy. V'nitmeis bum. So Rashi says, v'nitmeis bum. If you make yourself tummy while you're down here in this world, you'll be tummy in the next world, he says. But the Chazal say that v'nitamtem bam, not a lashon tumah, a lashon of timtum. That what? Yeah, it closes the person. So he says that the Chafetz Chaim al HaTorah, so he speaks about this Inyan. He gives a mashal. He says there was a person who worked in his business was he dealt with different very nice smelling spices and things, fragrances, and that's what he always was accustomed to be in such an environment. And then, unfortunately, his business folded. And this kind of guy, if he ever went to a place where there was a bad smell, he couldn't take it because he was used to having the best smelling things. But now that he couldn't find a job, I once experienced this thing. The truth, I once was trying to collect money for the Carl in Melbourne. I was in Melbourne. I went to Sydney. There was someone to see there, and a wealthy person. And when I got near his business, I already had when I got near the building, I already had a close my. They worked with hides. They made, and I'm telling you, mamish. Even got near the building, and then I went in the building, and the people working there, they're working every day, So this Chafetz Chaim speaks about it. He says this guy that lost his parnasa, he couldn't stand the smell, but now he had to get a job there, so he had to go there, and with time, he got used to it. He said he became the smell didn't bother him. So he says that's what the Torah is telling us. He says that if we eat dvarim tmeim, if we're not careful with kashrus, and we eat the things we shouldn't eat, he says like a verse that is verstops the person. It closes. That's what it makes him. It tamtem is a lave. It affects the heart, the neshama of a person, until it tamtem that he doesn't feel anything anymore. It becomes his neshama loses its sensitivities. He's ruining his neshama. So this is with the machal sasuris, but b'chlal with averis. If we do averis, it brings us down. So it affects us. We lose the sensitivities and so on. So this is the inyanim that at the beginning of Azman, we had the beginning of Azman, and we're zeichet to be in a yeshiva, we're zeichet to learn Torah, and we're zeichet to have the ability, the time, whatever it is, to learn. That is the tachlis of the bria. Not everyone is zeichet to that. Not everyone has the opportunity. But if someone's here, he has a tremendous. We should thank Hashem that we're close. We have shaykhis to the tachlis of a person, and if we apply ourselves, each person will apply ourselves. We're supposed to grow. This is a place where a person can grow. And a person takes it to heart, and he says, I want to understand the Gemara better. I want to understand how to learn better. That's mamish, and it affects a person. And chalila, a person isn't careful, a person can go down, a person can fall. A person has to be always careful. A person can never be secure with himself. But this is the avodah of a person. And this is the beginning of his man. It's also actually in Meisphira. It's also proper to mention this. We're counting towards Kabbalah HaTorah. It's also supposed to be a time of growth that we're supposed to pick up the midas of that achana for Kabbalah HaTorah. This is what we hope that we'll have Bez Hashem a good zman. Everyone should be matzliach and should be happy. And we should have a simcha HaTorah. It's not that it's a simcha that we have, that we're fortunate, that we should feel fortunate. Like the Chazon Ish writes, this person, he doesn't realize, he doesn't evaluate it, he doesn't value himself, what he's doing, how much he's accomplishing, how much what his Yeshivas. And that's each person, we should be able to continue growing, and David should have nachas ruach from us. Go ahead.
Yeah.